Good afternoon, y'all, or bad afternoon if you're in my shoes. So I just got off work. It's Monday. I woke up this morning, went out to get in the old Doge to go to work, and the battery was completely dead. Now when I say completely dead, I mean you open the door, there's no dome light, there is nothing. I mean way dead. And so I didn't have time to mess with it, so I jumped in the Cherokee and drove it to work. And I got home this afternoon and I jumped this thing off with the Cherokee, brought it up here, and we've got the battery out over there on the trickle charger, and you can see that battery, after being jumped off and drove up here, is at 32%. 32%. That ain't nothing. So like I said, we got it on the charger. We're going to charge that back up. But let me tell you, this is the third time that this has happened. No, fourth time this has happened. So the first time it happened, this thing had an old battery in it, and so I just said, well, I'll just replace the battery. And so I put an AGM battery in it, and thought I was good to go. And then after quite a while it did it again. Well, that time I thought that it might have been something to do with the stereo I put in, so I double checked everything. I charged the battery up and everything seemed fine. The stereo shuts off, the amp shuts off. I checked them every day. Every time I shut the truck off, everything was good. And after a while it did it again. Well, then when it did it again that time, I checked, and this little USB port right here, it has a light inside of it. And when you hit this little button, it lights up and turns on the charge ports. So, but the bad thing about it is, if you press on the top of this, just like that, it turns that button on. Well, that thing was on. So I thought, well, maybe that's what got me. So I disconnected it, took the wire off, or I took the fuse out for it. And I thought, well, I'm good to go now. That was 2 weeks ago. And then this morning, we had this problem. So if I drive it every day, it doesn't kill the battery. But if I leave it sit for 2 days, and then get up in the morning and come to get in the truck, then the battery's dead. So I'm thinking that we may have a bad diode in the alternator, because I don't see anything else. There's nothing staying on when you turn it off. Well, nothing that I can tell visually. So I'm suspecting a diode. Now, if it's not the diode, then we'll have to really start digging deep. But I'm thinking it's a diode. So what we're going to have to do, since we have the battery out, and my multimeter does have a diode checker, we're going to pull this air box off of the top so we can get to the alternator. Now the alternator is still charging, but it'll still charge even if you have a bad diode. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but let me grab the right tool for this. All right. So these are 10 millimeter, and if you were going to replace your alternator, you'd still want to take this air box off. It's got another bolt right back there, and we need to take this off. I need an extension. So yeah, I'm hoping that it's just the diode and we can slap another alternator on it and be good. It would kind of make sense with the issues I've been having, but you just never know. So we'll pull this clamp off. That'll get this back out of the way. Then we can get to that one bolt down there. And hopefully, looks like there's a connector I gotta pull off too. So there's a little connector there, like an intake air or something, I don't know. Now, looks like there's another clamp back there at the throttle body. We gotta get off. Yep. Or loosen anyways. Why in the world they put that fitting way up in there like that? Or not fitting, but clamp. Well, we'll just add some more extensions. That got her. That got her. Now this thing should come off of here. Yep. That's the clamp I was having to get on that throttle body. Ooh, I caught it. How about that? All right. So, diode checking is not that difficult. You got your alternator right here, and if you squeeze this and pull this little cover back, there's your big positive cable coming from the battery. We got to take that off. Half inch. Ooh, that thing's hot. Alright, so we'll pull that back. Now, you don't want to do this with your battery connected for obvious reasons, because then that cable I just took off would be hot. But you also want to unplug your regulator thing there. And I think that's all the plugs on this thing. So, now that we have that unplugged, we can take our meter and my meter has a diode checker setting. So we'll put it on the diode check. And what we should have here, if we put these on right, put one on the stud, the red one. Oh, wait a minute. Gotta see. Amps. Okay, yeah, I got it plugged in the right place. Alright, so we'll stick one on there and the other on the body of the alternator, and my diode check function does not seem to be working. Why do we have a 0.1? Let me get my other meter real quick. I'll be right back. Alright, so I got my other meter now, the Fluke. And I've got it set on the diode checking. And if we put the red on the power stud right there and the black on the body of the alternator, we get nothing, which is what you're supposed to get if you have a good diode. So if we swap them, you can see we got a reading. So the diode is actually good in this thing, which is unfortunate because I was really hoping that that was going to be my problem, and it is not. So now we got an even bigger problem. What I'll have to do is tomorrow we'll see if this battery comes up all the way. So I will admit that 2 weeks ago, the last time this happened, I trickle charged the battery for a couple hours, and I've read that AGM batteries take about 24 hours or so to charge all the way, and it was not all the way charged when I took it off of the charge. I mean, it was right around 36% when I took it off of the charger and put it back in the truck because I needed to drive the truck. So now what I'm going to do is put these wires back on the alternator, and we're going to let that battery charge overnight till tomorrow after work. And hopefully when we come up here tomorrow afternoon, the battery will be charged and we can put it in here, and then we will use the amp meter function on the multimeter to check the draw at the negative cable and see what that looks like. So maybe it's just the fact that the battery never had a chance to get charged all the way up. And it may be that the AGM is just not the right battery for this vehicle. I know the charging cycle for an AGM is much different than a lead acid battery, so maybe that's the problem. I don't know. I'm gonna have to do some more research. But in the meantime, I can't really do any more diagnosis until I get that battery charged up and back in here. So we'll be back tomorrow with that. Good morning, y'all. So we're still working on the Dodge, trying to figure out why the battery keeps going dead. You'll remember, let me wipe this off real quick. The other day I checked the diode in the alternator, and it occurs to me that some of y'all may not understand what we were doing there. So to try to explain it to you, you don't need to know everything about how all this stuff works, but basically an alternator generates AC electricity. So this is your alternator pulley, there's your alternator, and you'll have usually a stud on it and then a plug. So when this spins, it makes AC current. The problem is your car needs DC. So inside there's a rectifier. A rectifier takes AC current, changes it to DC current, basically straightens it out. And then there's a diode. And what a diode is a check valve. It's basically the same thing as a check valve. So you got a cable hooked to here, and it goes to your battery, right? So you want current to go out of here to your battery to charge the battery and run all of the vehicle's electronics. You don't want it to come back, and that's what the diode prevents. So when you hear people saying they're going to check the diode, what they're doing is checking the diode inside of here, and it's basically an electronic check valve. It lets electricity go to the battery, but it doesn't pull electricity from the battery. It only lets the electricity flow one direction. and the symbol for it is that. And you'll see it if you're using a meter that has a diode checker. You'll see it right there. And so if you're trying to and if you're looking at a drawing and it has a diode, the direction of the arrow is the direction of the current flow. So when we were using the diode checker, what we did, you also had a cable plugged in here, which is basically your voltage regulator and all that good stuff, right? So in order to check the diode, what you want to do is unplug this, disconnect your battery, and then disconnect this cable from the alternator so there's nothing hooked to the alternator. Then you take your red lead from your multimeter, put it on the stud, and your black lead grounded on the case of the alternator, and you should not have a reading. It should be OL or 0 depending on your meter. And if you flip the leads, then you'll have a reading. And that's showing you that it's allowing the electricity to flow the current to flow one way but not the other. So that's what we were doing. And our diode in our alternator is in good shape. So then the next thing I did, which wasn't on camera, is I took the meter and I hooked it. I took the negative cable off of the battery and hooked the meter in between the negative cable and the negative terminal on the battery. And on older cars, this is how you would try to find a parasitic leak. You would put your meter, you'd switch your leads to the milliamp things, and you would put your meter on DC, set the scale to milliamps, and you would set the meter up. I have some here, I'll show you how I did it. I have clamps that'll fit on the, there they are. So I put my clamps on, and you can get different attachments for these leads. You can either spend a crap ton of money and buy a fancy snap-on roll-up kit with all the lead things like I did 30 years ago, or you can just go on Amazon and buy one of these old cheap sets, and both of them work. So anyways, what I did, now again, this is with the truck off, keys out of the ignition, the door's been open and closed, and we've waited 20 minutes for all of your retained accessory power and stuff, all of the stuff to power down like it's supposed to. And you put the meter in between the negative battery cable and the negative post on the battery, and you'll see a milliohm signal, and then you start pulling fuses until that signal drops, and then you know what circuit the problem is in. But as soon as I started pulling fuses on this, I started getting all kinds of crazy readings, and I suspect it's because of the CAN bus system on this truck. I don't think the old way of checking for a parasitic leak will work, but that's okay because we got another tool to try, which is a amp hound. So a buddy of mine suggested this thing to me, so I went on Amazon and bought one. It is sold by Calvan Tools, part number 72, and this is amp hound 2. This is second iteration. And I also found while I was looking at this online is that you can get an amp hound from the Snap-on Man, all of the tool trucks, but guess what? It's the same one. They just put their own name on it and charge twice as much. You can get this on Amazon. I think I paid like $111 for it. And then I got this, it comes with all these different leads, like a pair of regular leads, and then these are all leads that they'll actually snap onto the top of a fuse. But what I've got are these, which is a tweezer lead. So basically each side of that tweezer is one side of the thing. because what you want to do is get on the top of the fuse on both sides of it, and this allows you to check for parasitic leaks without removing power from the system. You can check it piggybacking on the fuses. So I'm going to wait about 20 more minutes for this to make double sure everything is powered down, and then we're going to start checking for a parasitic leak. Because it's got one. It's not a huge one, because it takes generally 2 days. If I drive this every day, it's fine. If it sits for 2 or 3 days, that it kills the battery. So we're going to give this a shot and see if we can find it. Either we'll find where the parasitic leak is, or it could be that it's an intermittent parasitic leak. In other words, it just happened to happen the 2 times I left the truck sitting for a couple of days. That's a possibility. Or it could also be that I never fully charged the battery back up the very first time when I did have something left on. Because apparently the AGM batteries take a lot longer on the charger, and I know when I charged it up, I only charged it at like 32%, and I figured, like a lead acid battery, you know, it's good enough to start the truck, and then I'll drive it for a half an hour, and it'll be fine. But apparently that's not how it works with the AGM batteries. So I'm not really sure which problem it is, but we'll give this thing a little bit longer to shut everything down, and we'll check. So I'll be back with that. Also, I've already gone through, I have the fuse chart. Now this truck does not have relays and stuff. It's a weird system. So apparently the fuses and the POM and everything, it's all in one, it's all one unit. I'm not really sure. I've never seen one like that, but it is what it is. So, but I went through and I made sure all the fuses are correct in their holes with the correct amperage and all that. So we'll get, like I said, we'll give it a little while. I'll bring you back and we'll try out this amp hound and see if we can't find where a parasitic leak is. I have an idea of where I think it is, but we'll see. All right, y'all, let me show you how this little tool here works. It's pretty awesome. Now I had to take my tweezer attachment off because the points on it are not sharp enough to get down in these fuses. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to set this right here. I don't know if you'll be able to see it in the camera, but I'll show you. So basically, let me start from the beginning. All right, so when it's off, you hit the on button, and it's got beeping, and it's got 3 dashes across there. So now you're ready to start checking. So you just set that there, and you take your 2 leads and you put them on each side of each fuse. 1 beep and zeros. Let me see if I can do this with one hand here. Let's get on this one. Hold on. Okay. So I'm on that fuse. You got the 1 beep and you got zeros across there. There's no current being drawn by that fuse. So I went ahead and checked all of them, and I got over here, there's 1 fuse in this whole box that's drawing current. Right here. Now you see you heard 3 beeps, and it says 0.15, but what we want to do now that we have found the fuse that is the culprit, you want to hit this fuse value button and flip through it until you get to the fuse value of your fuse, which is 20. And then over here you got fuse type, which is already on mini micro, so we're good there. So now if we got that, then we want to hold the fuse value button until it goes back to the regular screen, and we can put these back on the pins on this fuse, and you'll see that that thing is drawing 0.75 of an amp, which is far and above what it ought to be drawing. So now that we know which circuit is our parasitic draw, we can go to our fuse chart in here, and that fuse is number 11. So we'll flip over here, and number 11, 20 amp yellow fuse, goes to all these different things. And I've got a couple of different fuse charts in here with different information on what the fuses are, so we'll look on another one here. So this says it's satellite receiver, cluster, Sentry key remote entry module, underhood lamp, wireless control module, and electronic overhead module, and satellite receiver, radio, media system, data link connector, hands-free module. And the third chart, I'm pretty sure, says about the same thing. Yep, radio, media, blah, 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 blah. So, here's the thing. This is a base model truck. So if we go through everything it says on here as being on that fuse, radio, we have one of those. Media system, monitor, DVD, don't have that. Data link connector, not sure if it has that or not. I'm pretty sure that's the computer. So this should have a milliamp draw, but it should be down around 30 or 35 milliamps, not 3/4 of an amp. Hands-free module, don't have that. Satellite receiver, don't have that. Cluster, we have one of those. That's your gauge cluster. Sentry key remote entry, don't have that. Don't have an underhood lamp, don't have wireless control module, don't have electronic overhead module. So that kind of narrows it down to cluster and radio. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run down to the house and get on my computer and look up on the internet and find out exactly where everything from this fuse number 11 goes to. So I'm going to go do that, and then we'll come back and see what's going on, see what we need to start checking. All right, y'all, I have figured this thing out. So on this truck, that circuit for fuse 11 can go to a lot of things depending on which model and which accessories you have. But basically on this base model truck, the only thing it goes to is the radio and the instrument cluster and the data link, which is CAN bus. So figuring that I haven't replaced the cluster and I haven't replaced the CAN bus, but I had replaced this radio, I started with the radio. So what I did is I took the dash off and took my radio out, plugged all the stuff back into the dash so that, you know, it would act normal, and closed the door, turned everything off, took the key out of the ignition, and waited 20 minutes, rechecked the fuse, still had 3/4 of an amp pulling. So we knew it wasn't the factory stereo. But what I found when I went in here is I've got this Metra CAN bus adapter in here, this box right here that's supposed to adapt it for the CAN bus, and it was warm, and so I disconnected the harness for it. It basically goes in between the radio and the vehicle wiring harness in order to make that retained accessory power work like a factory radio. But when I unplugged this and then close the door, wait 20 minutes, no more draw. So that box, that adapter box for the stereo, is the problem. So now I have to come up with a new way to wire this stereo up in order to not kill the battery every night. So I'm going to get rid of that adapter, obviously, because we don't want that problem, and come up with a different way of doing it. Either I can hook the problem with this truck, if you watch the video where I installed the stereo in it, is the factory radio is controlled by CAN bus, which means it has a 12 volt positive cable run to it, 12 volts at all times, like all of them do. But instead of having a switched ignition running to the radio, it uses a CAN bus to turn the radio on. Well, obviously that won't work with any aftermarket radio. So, thinking I was doing the right thing, I bought that adapter that mimics the CAN bus signal to, or basically the CAN bus signal goes into that box and then it turns on a 12 volt wire to the radio to make it work right. But obviously there's something wrong in this box, and I'm not the only one that's had a problem with it. Other people have too. So now my options are, I can rewire the stereo plug using the 12 volt constant from the truck for the 12 volt for the memory wire, and then I can hook the ignition wire either to the cigarette lighter, because it does turn on and off with the ignition through the CAN bus, but still it's a 12 volt signal there, or I can run a wire from down here in my console up to it with a switch to turn it on and off. And I haven't decided yet which way I'm going to go, but I will let you know when I do it. I'm kind of leaning towards just hooking into that cigarette lighter. I know that's what they do for the factory amp, but my only concern with doing that is pulling too much power from that cigarette lighter, because I already keep my GPS plugged into it, and causing more CAN bus issues. But I'm thinking that's the way that's the direction I'm gonna have to go. It's either that, or I'm gonna have to go in my console where I have the 4 gauge cable for the amp, for the 2 amps run, and come off of it with a switch to turn the power on and off to the radio, which is also an option, and it'll work. But I haven't decided yet which way I'm gonna go. But I'll bring you back and show you when I do decide. I'm gonna gnaw on this for a minute. But we did find the draw, so that's the good part. Now it's just a matter of getting the radio installed where that doesn't happen anymore, and we'll be golden. So I'll bring you back when I figure out how I'm gonna accomplish that. All right, y'all. So let me show you what I ended up doing. You can see the dashboard's all back together again. Everything's working. The radio's working, turning on and off just like it's supposed to. And I eliminated this, which is a Metra XSVI 6502 CAN bus adapter. So what this is supposed to do, these Dodges, when they come from the factory, they don't have a switched 12 volt signal at the radio. You know, usually you in all old cars and stuff, you had a 12 volt all the time that worked your memory, kept your radio stations and such. And then you had a 12 volt ignition switched wire which turned the radio on and off when you turned the truck on and off. So on these, they don't have that 12 volt ignition switched wire. What they have is a CAN bus. And so there's a milliamp signal sent to the factory radio that turns it on and off. Well, that's great if you have a factory radio, but if you put an aftermarket one in there, then you somehow have to get a 12 volt switched ignition wire to turn the radio on and off. So I did it what's supposed to, quote unquote, the right way, and I put this CAN bus adapter in there. And what it did was it got the CAN bus signal from the CAN bus and then switched on a 12 volt wire to the radio to turn the radio on. And then when you turned it off and the CAN bus signal went away, told it to turn off, this would turn the radio off. And it did that. It worked to turn the radio on and off, and then the radio would turn the amps on and off via the you know, your blue amp power on wire. So everything was working the way it was supposed to. But when the truck was off, for some reason this little box right here was pulling 3/4 of an amp. I don't know why. It, like I said, it was turning the radio on and off. That radio wasn't pulling anything, because what I did, I took the dash apart and I unplugged the radio from this right here, and we still had that 3/4 of an amp draw. But then when I unplugged this from the truck harness, that draw went away. So something is wrong inside of that. But what I did instead is, like a lot of other people do, instead of trying to use, I'm not even using the CAN bus system. What I did is went in behind the dash where the cigarette lighter plug is, and I piggybacked the wire off of it to the radio. And all these are, you know, soldered in and heat shrinked properly. And so now the radio turns on and off like it should. And the amps all turn, you know, everything turns on and off like it should. But now we can take our, I think I left it up here. We can take our amp pound here, and where before on this fuse for the radio we were getting 3/4 of an amp. Let me set it for the right fuse here. 20 amp fuse. Before we were getting 3/4 of an amp. Now when we hook to it, we get 0. No more draw. That's how it's supposed to be. So we should be able to put the cover back on that and be good to go. No more dead batteries. We'll know in a couple of days, but I'm going to put the cover back on that battery box and put this stuff away and go park this thing, and I will drive my Cherokee. It's Saturday right now, so I'll park this thing. I'll drive my Cherokee on Monday, and then Tuesday we'll come out to get in this thing for work and see if it cranks. If it cranks, then we know for sure we're good. But I'm fairly certain we're good, because like a 3/4 of an amp is what was killing that battery. Like I said, if you drove it every day, it was fine. Although I imagine the alternator was doing quite a bit of work to keep the charge the battery back up, but it was start and run. You would never notice a difference until you let it sit for 2 or 3 days. So that is the conclusion of this video. We got found the parasitic draw with that tool and got it fixed, and we should be good to go now. So I appreciate y'all watching, and we will see you in the next video. Y'all have a good one.